They called me useless and a freeloader at my mother's anniversary party, in front of everyone, until I calmly opened the gift box they told me to take and leave. My name is Lily Anderson. I'm 27 years old, and the night they called me useless happened at a polished anniversary party in Plano, Texas, surrounded by people who believed they already knew my story. It was my mother, Karen Miller's wedding anniversary with my stepfather, Stephen Miller. A perfect suburban venue, soft lighting, expensive smiles, about 50 guests who nodded politely while measuring worth in careers, homes, and appearances. I stood there holding a neatly wrapped gift box when my mother laughed and told the table, "Lily never really figured life out. She's always needed help." Stephen didn't correct her. He leaned back, looked at me, and added, "Some people just don't grow up." They told me to take my gift and leave. I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I placed the box on the table instead, because before anyone judged what I brought that night, they needed to understand what I survived to stand there at all. They called me useless and a freeloader at my mother's anniversary party in front of everyone, and then told me to take my gift and leave. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even ask why. I just stood there holding the box and breathed. My name is Lily Anderson. I was 27 years old that night, standing in a tastefully decorated event space in Plano, Texas, the kind of place designed to look warm and welcoming while quietly reminding you who belongs and who doesn't. It was my mother, Karen Miller's anniversary with my stepfather, Stephen Miller. 15 years together. 15 years of building a life that no longer had room for me. The room was full. About 50 guests, neighbors, friends, people from Stephen's work, everyone dressed in soft colors and polite confidence. Conversations floated easily, punctuated by laughter that never quite reached the eyes. I arrived alone. Not because I had no one, but because this was something I needed to do by myself. I'd spent longer than I wanted to admit choosing what to wear. Nothing flashy, nothing cheap, something neutral, forgettable. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to show up, say congratulations, and leave quietly. That plan lasted about 30 seconds. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The pause, the subtle shift in energy, the quick glances that lingered a beat too long. My mother stood near the center of the room, smiling broadly, glass in hand. She looked comfortable, confident, like a woman who had convinced herself she'd made all the right choices. When she saw me, her smile faltered, just for a second. Then it returned, sharper than before. "Oh," she said lightly, turning to the people beside her, "that's Lily, my daughter." She said it the way you might introduce a distant relative you don't quite know what to do with. Someone nodded. Someone else smiled politely. Karen tilted her head and added, "She's still finding her way." A few soft laughs followed. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. I stepped forward and held out the gift. A simple box, wrapped neatly. Nothing extravagant, nothing careless. "Happy anniversary," I said. Stephen glanced at the box, then at me. "What's that?" he asked. "A gift," I replied. "For us." He raised an eyebrow. Karen laughed, a little too loudly. "Stephen, don't get excited. Lily's never been great with money." The words landed casually like they were harmless. They weren't. Stephen leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So," he said, "are you working these days? Or still figuring things out?" There it was. The question they always asked, the one designed to corner you. "I'm working," I said calmly. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "She's always had something. Temporary things. She just never sticks with anything long enough." I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Stephen sighed and reached for the box, then stopped himself like he'd reconsidered something. "You know what?" he said, pushing his chair back slightly. "We don't need this." He gestured toward the box. "Whatever it is." Karen nodded. "It's sweet you came, Lily, but maybe this isn't the right place for you tonight." Someone shifted uncomfortably. A fork clinked against a plate. Stephen's voice hardened. "Take your gift and go. This isn't a place for freeloaders." The word hung in the air. Freeloader. I'd heard it before, in different forms, different tones, but never like this. Never publicly. Never as a performance. For a brief moment, my chest tightened so sharply I thought I might actually say something I'd regret. Then the feeling passed. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was clarity. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, at the woman who hadn't called me in years unless she needed something, at the woman who told people I was irresponsible instead of admitting she'd stopped supporting me, at the woman who found it easier to shrink me than explain my absence. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. "I should probably show you what's inside," I continued, setting the box gently on the table instead of picking it up. Stephen scoffed. "Nobody cares." "That's okay," I said softly. "This isn't about caring." I untied the ribbon, and as I lifted the lid, the room leaned in, whether they wanted to or not, because they'd already decided who I was. They just didn't know yet how wrong they were. The room grew quiet as the lid came off the box. Not dramatic silence, the uncomfortable kind, the kind where curiosity fights embarrassment. Inside, resting against dark velvet, was a single silver key. That was it. No note, no explanation, just a key. A few people exchanged looks. Someone near the end of the table let out a short laugh, the kind meant to signal relief. "That's it?" a woman murmured. My mother smiled thinly. "Lily, what is this supposed to mean?" I picked up the key slowly, feeling its familiar weight between my fingers. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the key to a 2-bedroom apartment." A pause. Stephen tilted his head. "And?" "In Austin," I continued. "Near downtown, quiet building, paid in full." The air shifted. I reached back into the box and lifted the folded document beneath the key. Thick paper, official, stamped. "It's mine," I added. "I bought it 3 months ago." For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone laughed again, louder this time. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said. Karen's smile faltered. "Lily, you don't need to make things up." I unfolded the document and turned it slightly so the people closest could see. "It's a property deed," I said. "Recorded. You can look it up." Stephen shook his head. "You don't have that kind of money." "I do," I replied. The words felt strange in my mouth, not because they weren't true, but because I'd never said them out loud in front of people who had spent years assuming the opposite. "I run a logistics consulting firm," I continued. "I started it 5 years ago. We work with mid-sized manufacturers." Someone pulled out their phone, then another. A woman across from my mother frowned at her screen. "There's a company registered under her name." Karen's face went pale. "That doesn't mean anything," she said quickly. "Anyone can register a business." "Yes," I agreed, "but not everyone keeps one alive long enough to buy property outright." Stephen stood up. "This is inappropriate. You're embarrassing us." I met his eyes. "I was told to leave. I'm just explaining why I won't." A voice cut in from the side. "Lily?" I turned. Judith Carter stood near the edge of the room, gray hair pulled back neatly, calm, observant. She'd known my father. She looked at me carefully, then smiled in a way that felt familiar. "You look like him," she said softly. My throat tightened, but I nodded. Judith turned to my mother. "You told me Lily couldn't hold a job, that she was always asking for help." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Judith continued. "You didn't mention she was running a successful firm." Karen's voice shook. "I didn't know." "That's not true," I said quietly. The words landed heavier than I expected. "I sent updates," I continued. "You never responded." The room buzzed now, not with gossip, but with something sharper. Recalculation. I took a breath and reached into my purse. "There's something else," I said. Karen's eyes widened. "Lily, don't." I pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly with age. "My father wrote this," I said, "before he died." Judith inhaled sharply. I unfolded the letter. "Lily, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't be there to protect you. I've set aside money in your name, separate from everything else. Use it to build your life. Don't let anyone tell you who you are." I lowered the paper. "He didn't trust that I'd be taken care of," I said, looking directly at my mother. "So he planned ahead." Karen's face crumpled. "That's not fair." "What wasn't fair," I replied evenly, "was telling people I was a failure when you simply stopped paying attention." Stephen took a step forward. "This conversation is over." Judith stepped between us. "No," she said, "it's just starting." I folded the letter carefully and put it away. I didn't come here to punish anyone. I didn't rush out. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I walked, step by step, past the tables, past the frozen smiles, past the people who suddenly found their phones very interesting. The sound of my heels against the floor felt louder than it should have, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one knew how to respond to. Behind me, someone whispered my name. Then again, louder. "Lily, wait." I didn't. Outside, the Texas night air hit my face, warm and still. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the door, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Relief. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer responsible for correcting everyone's misunderstandings. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. I didn't look at it. I drove back to my hotel with the radio off, the city lights blurring past the windshield. For years, silence had felt dangerous to me, like something was about to go wrong if no one was talking. That night, it felt earned. In the room, I set the gift box down on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were steady. That surprised me most. I checked my phone then. Missed calls from my mother, 2 from Stephen, 1 from an unknown number, a text from Judith Carter. "I'm proud of you. Your father would be too." I stared at that message for a long time before placing the phone face down. Sleep came easily. The next morning, the fallout arrived quietly, the way consequences usually do. By noon, I had 3 emails from people who had been at the party. Polite messages, careful wording. I didn't realize, "I'm sorry for assuming. If you're ever open to coffee." I read them without anger. I didn't respond. Not because I was bitter, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Explanation is optional. That afternoon, I got a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again and again. On the 4th call, I answered. "Lily," she said immediately, her voice tight. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "I chose to." There was a pause. "You embarrassed us." I leaned back against the chair. "You embarrassed me first. For years." "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "I was trying to protect us." "By lying about me?" I asked. Silence. "I didn't think it mattered," she finally said. "That's the problem," I replied. "It always mattered. You just didn't think I did." She started to cry then. Real crying, not the controlled kind she used in public. I let her. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "What do you want from me?" I thought about that. "I want you to stop telling people who I am," I said. "If you don't know, say you don't know." Another pause. "I can do that," she said. "Then do it," I replied. "That's all." I hung up before she could ask for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. That evening, I drove out of Plano and didn't look back. In Austin, life waited for me exactly as I'd left it. My apartment, my work, my routines, the life I'd built without applause. At the office the next morning, my assistant looked up and smiled. "Good trip." "Productive," I said. And it was. Because something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of who my family thought I was. I wasn't trying to outrun a label or prove a point. The story they told about me no longer required my participation. And once I understood that, I realized something else. Walking away wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a quieter one where I didn't need witnesses to know exactly who I was. The days after the party didn't feel dramatic. There were no confrontations in grocery store aisles, no surprise visits, no sudden apologies delivered with trembling hands. Instead, there was space. The kind of space that feels unfamiliar when you've spent years bracing yourself. Back in Austin, my routines picked me up where I'd left them. Morning runs before the heat settled in, coffee at the same corner cafe, long afternoons at the office, the hum of printers and quiet conversations grounding me in something real. Work helped, not as a distraction but as proof. Every email I sent, every decision I made, every invoice paid reminded me that my life didn't pause just because a lie had finally collapsed somewhere else. People talked, of course. I heard about it in pieces, through secondhand comments and carefully worded messages. A friend forwarded a screenshot from a neighborhood group chat in Plano. Someone else mentioned that my mother had stepped down from a committee she'd chaired for years. I didn't ask questions. What people did with the truth once they had it wasn't my responsibility anymore. One afternoon, Judith Carter called. "I hope this isn't intrusive," she said. I just wanted you to know something." I listened. "I've known your mother a long time," she continued. I believed her because it was easier than imagining she could be wrong about her own child. I appreciated the honesty. "I corrected a few things," Judith added, "when your name came up." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a while, staring at the sunlight crawling slowly across the floor. Correction felt different from defense. It didn't require urgency or emotion, just truth, stated plainly. That night, I opened the small safe in my apartment and took out the letter my father had written. I'd read it many times over the years, usually when I needed reassurance. This time, I read it differently. Not as a shield, but as a reminder. He hadn't planned for my success, he'd planned for my freedom. That distinction mattered. My mother called again a week later. I let it ring. Then she left a message. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." I believed her. Trying, I'd learned, didn't guarantee change. But it did shift the ground just enough for honesty to grow. I didn't call back right away. Not to punish her, to protect myself. When I did respond, days later, it was with one sentence. "Start with the truth. That's enough for now." At work, something unexpected happened. A junior consultant asked if we could talk privately. She closed the door behind her and sat across from me, twisting her hands together. "My family thinks I'm wasting my life," she said. "They say I should be grateful for whatever scraps I get." I recognized the tone, the careful phrasing, the self-doubt hiding behind politeness. "You don't need permission to want more," I told her. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like she'd been holding her breath without realizing it. After she left, I wrote those words down on a sticky note and placed it on the corner of my desk. Not as advice for others, as a reminder for myself. Weeks passed, then months. The story faded from conversation, replaced by newer distractions. My mother stopped calling as often, but when she did, the conversations were different, less rehearsed, less defensive. She didn't ask about my finances. She didn't make assumptions about my choices. She listened. That was new. One evening, as I locked up the office and stepped into the warm night air, I realized something quietly profound. Nothing in my life had actually changed after that party. What changed was the absence of something that had been there for years. The pressure to explain, the urge to justify, the habit of shrinking. I walked to my car feeling lighter than I had in a long time. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped playing a game that was never fair to begin with. And in that stillness, I understood. The most powerful thing I took with me that night wasn't the truth. It was the certainty that I no longer had to carry anyone else's version of who I was. By the time summer arrived in Austin, the story had stopped following me. Not because people forgot, but because I no longer carried it with me. That was the real difference. My days filled up in small, ordinary ways that felt unexpectedly meaningful. Early mornings reviewing reports before the heat settled in. Long walks in the evening when the city slowed and the air finally cooled. Conversations that weren't measured, weighed, or rehearsed. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd spent anticipating judgment until there was none left to anticipate. Work expanded, not explosively, but steadily. A new client came through a referral, then another. One afternoon, as I signed a contract and slid it back across the table, I caught myself smiling for no reason at all. This was mine, every part of it. No one had handed it to me. No one could take it away. My mother and I spoke once that month, just once. She asked how Austin was. She asked about the heat. She asked if I was taking care of myself. She didn't ask what I was earning. She didn't offer advice I didn't request. She didn't rewrite my life in her own words. When we hung up, I didn't feel drained. That was new. Stephen never called again. I wasn't surprised. Some people only know how to interact from a position of control. Once that's gone, there's nothing left to say. Judith sent a short message later that summer. "People are being more careful with their words now," she wrote. "Truth has a way of doing that." I closed the message and went back to my work. Carefulness wasn't what I wanted. Respect was. And for the first time, I had it, even if it came quietly. One evening, I found myself cleaning out a drawer I'd been avoiding for years. Old notebooks, receipts, papers I'd carried from place to place without ever opening. At the bottom was an envelope with my handwriting on it. Plans I never followed. fears I never admitted out loud. A list titled, "Things I'll Do When I'm Finally Free." I read it slowly. Some things felt small now, some things no longer mattered. But one line stopped me. Stop trying to prove I deserve to be here. I sat on the floor with the paper in my hands and laughed softly. I didn't need to cross that off the list. I'd already done it. Later that night, I stood on my balcony and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere out there, people were still explaining themselves to rooms that had already decided who they were. I wished them courage. Not to fight, not to perform, but to leave. The next morning, I sent a short email to my team. "Take the afternoon off on Friday," I wrote. "You've earned it." No justification, no explanation. I shut my laptop and stepped outside, letting the sun hit my face. The girl who once stood in a room being called useless would never have believed this life was possible. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was calm. And that calm wasn't accidental. It was chosen, piece by piece, boundary by boundary, truth by truth. I walked back inside knowing something with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, conflict, distance, reconciliation, or silence, I would meet it standing upright. Not defensive, not shrinking, just present. Because the life I was living no longer needed anyone else's permission to exist. And that, I realized, was the most lasting victory of all. By early fall, something had shifted so subtly I almost missed it. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for messages, not for explanations, not for the next emotional turn. The silence between my mother and me no longer felt tense. It felt settled, like a lake after a storm has passed, still holding the memory of turbulence, but no longer moving in response to it. Weeks went by without contact, then one short call, then nothing again. And for the first time, that rhythm didn't hurt. In Austin, my life continued to grow outward instead of inward. I stopped measuring progress by milestones that looked impressive and started measuring it by how my body felt at the end of the day. Was I exhausted in the wrong way or tired in the way that comes from doing meaningful work? More often than not, it was the second. I made changes at the firm, small ones, intentional ones. I turned down a contract that felt wrong, even though it would have paid well. I promoted someone who didn't ask for it, but deserved it. I made space for honesty instead of performance. People noticed. One client told me, "It feels different working with you, like I don't have to pretend." I smiled at that. Neither did I. One afternoon, while reorganizing files, I found an old resume from years ago, the one I'd sent out endlessly, back when I was desperate to be taken seriously. I read it now and barely recognized the woman who'd written it. So careful, so defensive, so eager to justify her own existence. I shredded it. That version of me had done her job. She'd gotten me here. She deserved rest. That night, I cooked dinner slowly without multitasking. I ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. I let the evening stretch without filling it with noise. Peace, I realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't demand acknowledgement. It simply stayed. My mother called once more near the end of the month. Her voice sounded different, less guarded, less performative. "I told someone the truth about you today," she said quietly. I waited. "They asked how you were doing," she continued, "and I said I didn't know, that you'd built a life on your own, and that I hadn't been part of it." There was no apology in her tone, no request, just a statement. "That's honest," I said. "Yes," she replied, "it is." We ended the call shortly after. No promises, no next steps. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Later, I sat on my balcony as the sun dipped low and the city shifted into evening. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. A car passed. Life moved, indifferent and steady. I thought about how long I'd believed reconciliation was the goal. It wasn't. Freedom was. Freedom to stop hoping someone else would finally see me clearly. Freedom to stop shrinking so others could feel taller. Freedom to let relationships become what they actually were, not what I wished they'd be. The party in Plano felt distant now, almost unreal, like a story I'd once lived but no longer needed to revisit. What stayed with me wasn't the humiliation. It was the moment I chose not to absorb it. That choice echoed forward into everything else, into how I spoke, into how I worked, into how I loved. I went inside as the night cooled, closed the balcony door, and turned off the lights one by one. Tomorrow would come, and the next day, and the next. And I would meet them without the weight of proving anything at all. That, I knew now, was what real independence felt like. The proof showed up when no one was watching, not in a room full of people, not with documents spread across a table, not with raised voices or stunned silence. It showed up on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving the office when a junior analyst caught up to me in the hallway. She looked nervous, the way people do when they're about to admit something they've been carrying alone. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She hesitated, then said, "How did you know when to stop trying to explain yourself?" The question landed deeper than she probably intended. "I didn't decide all at once," I said. "I noticed when explaining started costing me more than silence." She nodded slowly, like that made sense in her body before it made sense in her head. That was when I realized something important. I was no longer reacting to my past. Other people were learning from it. Not because I told the story, but because I lived differently afterward. At work, I stopped over-preparing for meetings where my voice already belonged. I let pauses sit without rushing to fill them. I asked questions instead of defending answers. The result surprised me. People leaned in more. They listened longer. They stopped interrupting. Confidence, I learned, doesn't argue for space. It occupies it. My days felt fuller but lighter. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I didn't flinch when conversations drifted toward family or success or money. Those topics no longer felt like traps. They were just topics. One evening, while cleaning my apartment, I found the gift box tucked away on a shelf. The ribbon still folded neatly inside. The velvet lining faintly creased where the key had rested. I held it for a moment. Not with anger, not with nostalgia. With gratitude. That box had done its job. It had revealed the truth to a room that needed to see it, and then it had stepped out of my life quietly, the way meaningful objects often do. I recycled it. That night, I received an email from someone I didn't know. She'd found my firm online and recognized my name from a brief mention in a local business column. She wrote, "My family thinks I'm irresponsible for choosing my career. I just wanted to know if it ever gets easier." I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then I replied with a single sentence. "It gets easier the moment you stop asking them to agree." I sent it and closed my laptop. Outside, the city hummed softly. Lights blinked on and off in windows across the street. Lives unfolding without permission or apology. I stood there watching and felt something settle into place. I didn't need closure anymore. I didn't need acknowledgement. I didn't need to be believed by people committed to misunderstanding me. The proof was everywhere now, in how I moved through my days, in how people met me without trying to define me, in how silence no longer felt like absence, but like space. I turned off the lights and went to bed, not thinking about the past, not rehearsing the future, just present. And for the first time, that was more than enough. Something changed the day I realized the story no longer followed me. I was standing in line at a small coffee shop near the office, half listening to the barista call out names, when I caught my reflection in the glass. Not the way I used to check myself, tense, alert, waiting to be judged, but casually, almost without thinking. I looked at ease. That startled me. For years, even in calm moments, there had been a low hum inside me, a readiness, as if I needed to be prepared to explain who I was at any second, prepared to defend a choice, prepared to correct a version of myself someone else had invented. That hum was gone. The coffee was called. I picked it up, thanked the barista, and walked back outside, realizing that the most important thing that had happened since Plano wasn't public at all. It was internal. At work, the firm had reached a comfortable rhythm, not frantic growth, not stagnation, just balance. I trusted my team. They trusted me. Decisions didn't feel like gambles anymore. They felt like extensions of who I already was. One afternoon during a meeting with a new client, she paused mid-sentence and said, "You don't seem rushed." I smiled. "I'm not." She laughed softly. "That's rare." It was, but it wasn't accidental. I'd spent years learning how to survive. Now I was learning how to stay. My mother and I hadn't spoken in a while, not out of avoidance, simply because there was nothing urgent left to say. When she did reach out, weeks later, it was with a short message. "I'm in Austin for 2 days. No expectations. Just wanted you to know." I read it twice before replying. "Coffee is fine. We met at a quiet cafe, neutral ground." She looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just less armored. We talked about small things, the weather, her garden, a book she was reading. She didn't ask about my work. She didn't bring up the past. Halfway through, she said something unexpected. "I used to think distance meant failure," she said quietly. "Now I think it might mean respect." I didn't rush to respond. "I think it can mean both," I said, "depending on how you use it." She nodded, accepting that without argument. When we parted, there was no dramatic moment. No hug, no promise. Just a quiet understanding that whatever we were now, it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, was enough. That evening, I went home and opened the notebook I hadn't touched in months. The one that used to hold plans, fears, reminders. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one line. "I don't need to be understood by everyone to live well." I closed it and put it back on the shelf. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much of my life had once been shaped by resistance. Pushing back, proving wrong, standing firm. Necessary at the time, but resistance isn't meant to last forever. Eventually, it gives way to something quieter. Ownership. I owned my choices now, my pace, my distance, my peace. The story that began with being called useless had ended somewhere I hadn't expected. Not with vindication, not with applause, but with ease. The kind of ease that comes when you're no longer living in response to anyone else's fear. I turned off the light and let the room settle into darkness. Tomorrow would be full, not heavy, not defensive, just full. And that was how I knew the story had finally let me go. There was a time when every quiet moment felt like an invitation for doubt. Silence used to echo with old voices, with judgments that weren't even being spoken anymore, but still lived somewhere in my head. That stopped. I noticed it one evening while driving home, stopped at a red light, watching the city glow around me. My mind wasn't replaying conversations. It wasn't anticipating criticism. It wasn't bracing for impact. It was simply still. I realized then that the past had finally lost its ability to interrupt my present. At work, decisions came more easily, not because they were simpler, but because they weren't tangled in fear anymore. I trusted myself. That trust showed up in small ways: shorter meetings, clearer boundaries, fewer apologies. I no longer softened my opinions to make them easier to accept. I no longer explained choices that didn't require permission. People adjusted. They always do. One afternoon, a colleague mentioned my family in passing, then stopped abruptly, as if unsure whether the topic was allowed. "It's okay," I said gently. "You can ask." She hesitated. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I thought about it. I wish I'd learned sooner that I didn't have to earn respect from people who refused to see me, I replied. That was the truth. The rest no longer mattered. My mother and I maintained a careful distance. There were birthdays acknowledged, holidays noted, no expectations attached. The relationship existed as it was, not as it should have been. And for the first time, that felt sustainable. I wasn't waiting for an apology that might never come. I wasn't hoping for a version of her that didn't exist. I had stopped confusing acceptance with surrender. Late one night, I stood by the window and watched rain streak down the glass. The city blurred into soft lights and shadows. I remembered the girl who once believed being called a freeloader meant something permanent about her character. I wished I could tell her this. Names given in anger don't define you. Labels given in fear don't last. What lasts is what you choose to build when no one is cheering. The strength to walk away quietly. The discipline to keep going without witnesses. The courage to live well without needing to be understood. Those things don't announce themselves. They accumulate. And one day, you look around and realize the echo is gone. The past is still there, but it no longer speaks over you. It simply exists, contained, unable to reach forward. I turned away from the window and went to bed without carrying anything extra with me. No defenses, no explanations, no unfinished conversations. Just rest. And that was how I knew I was truly free. The ending came without ceremony. No announcement. No final conversation. No moment where everything suddenly made sense. It arrived the day I realized I no longer needed to measure my life against a version of myself that was created by other people's fear. I was sitting at my desk late one evening, the office quiet, city lights glowing softly through the windows. I had finished my work and was packing up to leave when I caught myself smiling for no clear reason. Nothing remarkable had happened that day, and that was the point. For years, my life had been shaped by reaction, by proving, by bracing myself against assumptions that were never mine to carry. I thought freedom would feel loud when it finally arrived. It didn't. It felt ordinary. My mother still existed in my life, but no longer at the center of it. We spoke when there was something real to say. We didn't revisit the past or pretend it had been something else. We let it stay where it belonged. That distance wasn't punishment. It was clarity. Stephen never reached out again, and with time, I understood that silence for what it was. Not rejection, not avoidance. Irrelevance. The opinions that once had the power to shrink me had lost their place in my world. At home, my life felt grounded. Mornings were unhurried, evenings were calm. I no longer rehearsed conversations before they happened or replayed them afterward. I trusted myself to show up as I was, and that trust changed everything. I thought back to the night I stood in that room being called useless and told to leave. I remembered how small the space felt, how heavy the silence was, how certain everyone seemed that they already knew who I was. What they never understood was this: that moment didn't break me. It clarified me. It stripped away the last need I had for approval from people who only felt powerful when others felt small. I didn't win by proving them wrong. I won by walking away whole. The story people remember is about a gift box and a reveal. But that was never the real ending. The real ending was quieter. It was choosing myself without needing applause. It was building a life that didn't require explanation. It was learning that dignity doesn't come from being believed. It comes from believing yourself. That's how the story ends. Not with reconciliation, not with revenge, but with a woman who no longer needs to be defined by the room she once walked out of. And that ending, I've learned, is more than enough.